Section 12.4.4 Methods of Socialist/Communist States. Socialism and communism are different terms, although they share much. Specifically, they describe systems in which, to one degree or another, the state owns outright or effectively owns the means of production and attempts to equalize outcomes by government action. Communism is the more extreme of the two, describing a system in which the state, having made property illegal, owns all the means of production. Although there are differences between these terms, I will use, for the most part, the term socialist or socialism in the rest of this section. Background. Socialism arose from the 19th century critique of the Industrial Revolution. Poverty and inequality were characteristic of this age. The socialists argued that a restructuring of industry and society were needed to address these conditions. In the socialist solution, the state is the preferred vehicle for this transformation. Although socialism can come in both Christian and atheistic forms, most serious socialists tend to be atheists. This is particularly characteristic of the extreme forms where there is a persistent belief in the perfectibility of man, largely taken from Marx and Engels. The perfectibility of man seems to run in most strains of socialism and tends to pull it towards atheism. Furthermore, cultural forces operating outside socialism also tend to move it towards an atheistic view. It seems clear that as the West continues to move into a post-Christian world, the atheistic view will grow and dominate for cultural reasons, and the state will fill the vacuum created by killing God. Frenchman Henri de Saint-Simon, 1760 to 1825, was one of the earliest socialists, and the earliest serious socialist experiment was the Paris Commune of 1871. The French Revolution, 1789, also embraced many socialist ideas. There were also British socialists who worked out early socialist theory. Among the earliest was Dr. Charles Hall. Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883, and Friedrich Engels, 1820 to 1895, are the names most frequently associated with the development of socialist theory in its more extreme form, communism. V.I. Lenin took this theory and modified it and led the first great communist revolution in Russia, 1917. In Marx's scientific view, society would inevitably move towards a communist state, characterized by universal peace and inhabited by the selfless new socialist man. Private property would be a thing of the past. All would live at the same level, and goods would be equally shared by all. However, he believed that the final stages of this transformation would be initiated by a violent revolution of the working man, proletariat, over the industrial class and those who supported it, the bourgeoisie. This bourgeois class included intellectuals, government officials at all levels, and those in industry, but not part of the working class. Lenin took this theory and modified it, and among other things came up with the concept that a small, dedicated, and highly trained group of revolutionaries would lead the revolution. This revolutionary class was embodied in his Bolshevik party. In the creation of this revolutionary special force, Lenin was heavily influenced by Sergei Nechayev, 1847 to 1882, a figure in nihilistic, anarchistic revolutionary movement that assassinated Tsar Alexander II in 1881. Nechayev's greatest contribution was the Revolutionary Catechism, some of which appears below. The duties of the revolutionary toward himself. Number 1. The revolutionary is a doomed man. He has no personal interests, no business affairs, no emotions, no attachments, no property, and no name. Everything in him is wholly absorbed in the single thought and the single passion, for revolution. 2. The revolutionary knows that in the very depths of his being, not only in words, but also in deeds, he has broken all bonds which tie him to the social order and the civilized world with all its laws, moralities, and customs, and with all its generally accepted conventions. He is their implacable enemy, and if he continues to live with them, it is only in order to destroy them more speedily. 3. The revolutionary despises all doctrines and refuses to accept the mundane sciences, leaving them for future generations. He knows only one science, the science of destruction. For this reason, but only for this reason, he will study mechanics, physics, chemistry, and perhaps medicine. But all day and all night he studies the vital science of human beings, their characteristics and circumstances, and all the phenomena of the present social order. The object is perpetually the same, the surest and quickest way to destroying the whole filthy order. 5. The revolutionary is a dedicated man, merciless toward the state and toward the educated classes, and he can expect no mercy from them. Between him and them there exists, declared or concealed, a relentless and irreconcilable war to the death. He must accustom himself to torture. From the section, Relations of the Revolutionary Toward Society. 13. The revolutionary enters the world of the state, of the privileged classes, of the so-called civilization, and he lives in this world only for the purpose of bringing about its speedy and total destruction. He is not a revolutionary if he has any sympathy for this world. He should not hesitate to destroy any position, any place, or any man in this world. He must hate everyone and everything in it with an equal hatred. All the worse for him if he has any relations with parents, friends, or lovers. He is no longer a revolutionary if he is swayed by these relationships. 14. Aiming at implacable revolution, the revolutionary may and frequently must live within society while pretending to be completely different from what he really is, for he must penetrate everywhere, into all the higher and middle classes, into the houses of commerce, the churches, and the palaces of the aristocracy, and into the worlds of the bureaucracy and literature and the military, and also into the third division and the winter palace of the Tsar. From the attitude of the society toward the people. The society has no aim other than the complete liberation and happiness of the masses, that is, of the people who live by manual labor. Convinced that their emancipation and the achievement of this happiness can only come about as a result of an all-destroying popular revolt, the society will use all its resources and energy toward increasing and intensifying the evils and miseries of the people until at last their patience is exhausted and they are driven to a general uprising. Although Nechayev achieved little in his lifetime, his short catechism was a master work affecting socialists and communists long after his death. It fully informed Lenin in his work, and it laid out the path for all the socialists and communists who followed, even if they did not adopt his violent means. Specifically, Nechayev teaches that there must be a dedicated group whose job it is to bring about the revolution. The revolutionary will use every tool at his disposal to bring about revolution. As to the existing order with its politics, morality, and social structure, the revolutionary's goal is to bring it all down. The revolutionary will become part of the existing order, thus subverting it from within, so as to bring about its end more surely and quickly. The revolutionary will deliberately increase and intensify the evils and miseries of the people to move them to revolution. A quick examination of the socialist leaders since Nechayev will reveal that all these lessons have been learned well and frequently masterfully executed. Nechayev is echoed in Gramsci, Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse, Fromm, Reich, Cloward and Piven, Alinsky, Van Jones, Soros, Barack Obama, and many more. The methodological debate. Nechayev may have set out a general strategy and methodology to liberate the masses, but the full theoretical foundation and the detailed realization of the effort has been and will continue to be hotly debated by serious socialists. This debate became urgent when, after the successful Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the proletariat in the rest of Europe failed to rise up in revolt despite considerable help from Bolshevik Russia. The facts on the ground challenged the belief in the scientific determinism that characterized much of socialist thought at the time. Some began to realize that reliance on a revolutionary proletariat and scientific determinism were inadequate to achieve Marx's ideal. As a result, the socialists split into several groups, some continuing along the scientific route already traveled by Lenin, and other violent revolutionaries, while others sought less violent but more patient methods that addressed the heart of the problem, the inherent stability of Western culture against socialist attack. The downside was that the new methods would necessarily take longer to bring about the desired end. The new group understood that culture itself was the obstacle to socialist domination. The reason the proletariat did not rise up was because they benefited from and embraced their culture. Particularly problematic was patriarchy, the family, and the Christian religion which supported Christian morality. These had to be destroyed. A complete remaking of the entire culture was necessary. In 1923, a group devoted to this strategy, cultural Marxism, was formed in Frankfurt, Germany. As an informal movement, it goes by the name of the Frankfurt School. Its more formal instantiations have been the Institute for Marxism and the Institute for Social Research. The Frankfurt School has been successful beyond any reasonable expectation in both continental Europe and the United States. It is from the disciples of cultural Marxism that we have received political correctness, critical theory, pseudo-scientific justifications for unrestrained sexual expression, and similar arguments against patriarchy, the family, morals, and Christianity. The British Fabian Society was an earlier informal socialist group that had already seen that a slower transformation of culture was preferable and more sure than violent revolution. The Fabians have been and continue to be very successful in Britain and elsewhere. Thus, it is cultural Marxism in its efforts to fundamentally transform an existing culture to bring about Marx's utopian society that the West has battled and continues to battle. Although these groups have never had a formal association with any government, they have nevertheless exerted tremendous power over governments, as those within government have embraced and implemented their ideas. Much of their influence over government has come from their involvement in prestigious universities on both sides of the Atlantic. Governmental, industrial, and educational leaders come from relatively few universities within any country. Whatever philosophy becomes dominant in these gatekeeper universities prevails in the institutions that graduates of these universities subsequently enter. Thus, it is a simple matter to affect government, industry, education, in fact, every institution, without being in any of these institutions. By this same strategy, these ideas penetrate into the mass media, internet, radio, television, theater, music, etc., and begin to affect common people as well. Having thus acquired all the levers of power, it is possible to begin the fundamental cultural transformation. This process began a long time ago, both in Europe and America, and is well on its way to completion. Can it be stopped? Perhaps in America, but not without great resolve. The only thing that gives secular America any hope is its Constitution and those who insist that it, in its original intent, remains the law of the land. However, the Constitution is only a stopgap measure, for it offers no final solution to man's predicament. There is, however, one entity that will stand against this demonic onslaught, the Church of Jesus Christ, over which the gates of hell will not prevail. The waves of this raging storm may wash over it, but when cultural Marxism and all other principalities are long forgotten, the Church of Christ will remain. For the time being, the socialist state is a present reality that must be dealt with and understood. Even we Christians who properly have no interest in participating in the state must understand its means and ends to successfully defend against it, for it has been very successful at subverting Christianity. The New Class. Milovan Djilas, 1911 to 1995, an early Yugoslavian communist revolutionary who, upon seeing the true fruit of socialist and communist policies, wrote a scathing critique in his book The New Class, a book for which he was sent to prison. In this book, he argues that socialism has brought a new ruling class to the world stage. The new class is a new exploiting class, born of the former exploited class. This class should be considered new, for under the socialist system, politics is equivalent to power. This is a consequence of public ownership and of making everything political or part of the government. Djilas says that in the communist system, power and government are identical with the use, enjoyment, and disposition of almost all the nation's goods. He who grabs power grabs privileges, and indirectly grabs property. Consequently, in communism, power or politics as a profession is the ideal of those who have the desire or prospect of living as parasites at the expense of others. Djilas continues, the new class obtains its power, privileges, ideology, and its customs from one form of ownership, collective ownership, which the class administers and distributes in the name of the nation and society. However, as seen in the United States, it is not necessary for the state to assume ownership of everything for a socialistic new class to arise. All that is necessary is that it effectively exercises ownership over everything by regulations, laws, and outright lawlessness. For example, in the United States, there are laws that exempt Congress from activities like insider trading, and laws favorable to those foundations and corporations that will ensure the politician's wealth after he leaves office. Of course, all this corrupt legislation is for our good, especially for the children. Thus, America's new class, the new political ruling class, is able and does live parasitically on America. This new class is either fully informed or infected by the major tenets and goals of cultural Marxism, ideas and goals the population generally does not share with them, at least at the beginning of the effort to corrupt the culture. For this reason also, they may be considered a new class, for previous government officials were not entirely foreign to the culture of those they ruled. America's leaders today. America's new class is characterized by the following. 1. They do not share the culture of their subjects. 2. A considerable number even despise and disdain their nation and its history. 3. They hold in contempt the nation's political, social, and economic structure. 4. They attempt to transform the culture, the laws, and the political structure, even by illegitimate methods, in order to conform the nation to the socialist image they desire. This is done both covertly and overtly by laws, policy, regulation, taxation, welfare, as well as lawless actions such as corrupt financial dealings, unconstitutional laws and presidential decrees, ubiquitous surveillance, and oppressive use of the government organizations such as the military, IRS, FBI, CIA, NSA, and Justice Department, to name just a few. 5. They work with non-government organizations, captains of industry and banking, media elites, and academics to bring about a fundamental change in the nation's culture. This ruling class moves within the existing system, but is always pushing legal and ethical boundaries, even subverting laws and institutions whenever they can. As Nechayev teaches, they too insist that the ends justify the means. In many cases, the real movers and shakers not only want to transform their own nation into a socialist utopia, they also desire the end of all national identities in favor of a centralized, one-world government. The fruits of the socialist state. The goal of this cultural transformation is equality of outcomes and to meet all human needs. No one should have more than another, thus no one should have less than another. The extent to which the socialist state has achieved these goals may be determined by observing the fruits of its effort. Rather than bringing a wonderful socialist world, it has achieved the following. 1. Destroyed civil society. 2. Destroyed interpersonal relationships, including the family. 3. Destroyed initiative. 4. Destroyed incentives for business development. 5. Destroyed financial institutions. 6. Built a slave mentality, disconnecting consequences from behavior, thereby corrupting moral life. 7. Effectively enslaved those under its power. 8. Firmly established its political power over its subjects through dependence. Let us consider each of these in turn. Civil society consists of a multitude of voluntary associations that bind individuals and groups together. They are of special importance in caring for the needy and those at the margins of society. As a state insists on performing this task and confiscates more and more disposable wealth, these activities wither and disappear. This is intentional, despite protests to the contrary, for the state insists that all must come to it. Government-provided health care provides another example. It is becoming painfully obvious to all nations that there is not enough money to provide the highest quality health care to all. Under government-provided health care, faceless and nameless bureaucrats determine how health care is rationed. In health care provided within the free market, the market, that is, the ability to pay, determines how it is rationed. In a government system, access to health care is controlled by the government, while private access and payment with private funds is generally forbidden. Thus, if the government says you can't have the treatment, you are out of options. However, should the market decide, it is still possible to receive the care you desire through private charities, churches, or families who pool their money, and even doctors who charitably donate their time and resources. Before government-run health care, this was the way it worked. This required that the people have sufficient disposable income. This will generally be the case if the government has not already confiscated enormous amounts of wealth in its efforts to care for all. Interpersonal relationships also suffer under a socialist state, thereby destroying civil society. An excellent example is the destruction of the parent-child relationship. With the advent of Social Security and Medicare, the state, through taxation, has insisted on caring for the elderly. Today, for most adult children, it is unthinkable that they should care for their parents in their old age, let alone have them live with them. However, we're finding out that there isn't enough money for the state to care for all the elderly. The only solution is for families to once again care for their elderly. But this would require a tremendous change in cultural attitudes in both children and parents, and would also mean that government would have to relinquish its efforts to care for all, thereby freeing up wealth by reducing taxes so families could care for their elderly. This task can be done far more effectively and compassionately at the family level, nuclear and extended, than at the governmental level. The same argument and method can be applied to the needs of the sick and needy within a family, and even within a community. This worked in the past, and it might work again if the moral corruption brought about by the state's compassionate programs can be undone. The family is also ripped apart by state compassion. With welfare, women are able to provide basic needs for themselves and their children. The father is not needed. The results are gigolos who are often lawless, women who are able to bear children but not raise them, and feral children who dominate the adults. As a family is destroyed by state compassion, society itself is destroyed. But of course, the solution to the poverty of body and soul is more welfare, that is, more gas for the fire. Through punishing progressive taxation, the socialist state destroys initiative and new business creation. For people to risk starting a new business, there needs to be a reasonable expectation that the risk of personal assets and the extraordinary effort expended will be rewarded in the form of profit. If there is insufficient profit, the risk cannot be justified. In a progressive tax system, especially one envisioned by the socialists, the achiever is punished rather than rewarded. The arguments above are based on a cursory understanding of human nature. In a similar argument, how can a salesman or small businessman justify working harder if they can only keep 10 cents of the next dollar earned? Clearly, at some point, they will reach a diminishing return on their effort and cease working beyond that level, thereby terminating their economic contribution. Now multiply this by the millions and see what it does to an economy and a people's work ethic. Over the past 4 decades, Western socialist countries have pursued their socialist policies with deficit spending. This decades-long deficit spending is now bearing rotten fruit. Under the crushing weight of their debt, Western financial institutions are beginning to crumble, along with the states that manipulate them. The inevitable collapse will bring horrid devastation. The socialist state also breeds a slave mentality in its subjects by making them dependent on the state and by disconnecting consequences from behavior. Dependence on a ruling class for basic needs is characteristic of slavery. When dependence is willingly embraced, those made dependent have adopted a slave mentality and become in truth slaves. Their willingness in no way mitigates the brutal truth that they are slaves. By disconnecting consequences from behavior, the state encourages destructive behavior and thus enslaves. Effectively, these slaves first become slaves to their passions, the indulgence of which is funded by the state for the purpose of enslaving. The tragedy of American compassion in public policy towards blacks provides an example. At the end of slavery and into the 1950s, the black family had an illegitimacy rate similar to white families. The number of families with both a father and mother was also similar. With the advent of aid for dependent children, this changed rapidly for the worse and brought with it horrible social consequences. The grinding poverty that single-parent black households experienced was and remains heartbreaking. In its desire to help, the government gave black mothers welfare payments that provided a basic level of support. With this and other welfare programs, the mothers could afford a simple apartment and provide food for their children. With this new policy, there were no consequences for debauchery of any kind, including illegitimacy, divorce, or any sort of sexual perversion. Under normal circumstances, tremendous economic hardships result, which tend to limit behavior that destroys lives and families. Now there was no real cost for this behavior. On the contrary, the state became an enabler, and this behavior predictably increased. It is a truism that you get more of what you subsidize. With encouragement to live a debauched life, the state enabled the growth of a slave mentality, for moral debauchery is characteristic of slave peoples. As harsh as it seems, the consequences resulting from this sort of destructive behavior are tremendous regulators of it. When these consequences are short-circuited, disaster ensues. Would we rather have a relatively small number of families living in poverty, or an entire class of people encouraged and supported to destroy themselves and remain perpetually dependent on others? In the absence of this sort of welfare, there is no reason why those who have suffered the consequences of their sinful behavior cannot be helped. In such cases, the local community can provide for those willing to change their ways, adopt the children, or care for them in foster homes. However, the mothers and fathers who refuse to act responsibly can and should be left to fend for themselves, bearing the consequences of their behavior. This tough love is their only hope of coming to their senses. For black families, the end result of this misdirected compassion was a great increase in single-parent homes, illegitimate births, and poverty. The male was no longer needed in the home and could pursue other activities. Unfortunately, these were largely criminal activities. These well-intentioned policies have contributed to the complete breakdown of the inner-city black family. However, many in the black community now expect welfare, believing they are entitled to it. Thus, they embrace the very chains that enslave them. The payback to the politician who provides this welfare is continued support. The slave master is enabled by the very people he enslaves. A southern plantation owner would never have thought it possible that slaves would so gratefully embrace their slavery. More examples revealing the fruit of socialism abound and can be found in all segments of a socialist state, but they all demonstrate that slavery results from socialism. What makes it so diabolical is that enslavement is deliberately engineered to be voluntary. As the subjects of the socialist state embrace their dependence on the state, they make themselves slaves and secure the power of their socialist slave masters. Christianity and socialism. The encroachment of socialism into American Christianity is real and increasing, being driven by a variety of forces, some inside the church and others outside. Despite this effort, Christianity is completely incompatible with socialism for a number of reasons, the most important of which is the Christian imperative to be nonviolent and refuse to coerce and exercise power over another. Socialism relies entirely on coercion and the threat and actual use of violence to redistribute wealth. In contrast, Christianity approves of private property and free markets. Christianity affirms that individuals, not a group, are responsible for the care of others. The church is a corporate body, but coercion is not employed within it. Instead, individuals within the church, as they choose, give to others. Christianity also affirms personal responsibility in caring for the needy, while the church is seen as a last resort when all other private means of care have been exhausted. In the critique of socialism, we have also seen that socialism is also destructive of moral life and civil society. Those who affirm that state socialism is compatible with Christianity make a mockery of Jesus and his apostles, just as those who affirm that consumerism and capitalism are compatible. State socialism denies the nature of man and the need for God to transform him. Denying these realities, it builds a system that will always enslave. Despite its stated desires, socialism does not transform, but rather unleashes and enhances man's evil tendencies, unlike any other system of government. The great exception to what I have said above, condemning socialism or overt communism, is the true Christian form these may take. We can see this in the early chapters of Acts, where the Christians had all things in common. In more modern times, we see it in the Hutterites, who have been practicing it since the 1500s. There are several things to take note of. First, the arrangement is entirely voluntary. A person may enter or leave at will. No one is forced to participate or stay. Second, these people are motivated by their love for Christ and love for one another. Third, and most importantly, they may live in this selfless manner because the Spirit of God dwelling within them enables them. Section 12.4.5 Methods to redefine reality. The state has a vital interest in making its subjects perceive reality according to its desires, for the state frequently operates at odds with its subjects' interests. This is frequently the case as the state prepares to go to war, and as the state passes laws and executes policies contrary to the desires and interests of its subjects. The most basic manipulation of reality is the outright lie, deception, or censorship. It is most effective if the state controls all access to information, as it did in the Soviet Union, Communist China, and their progeny. Outright lies and deception even work in a democratic republic. America has lied to its citizens about the reasons for its involvement in World War I, about the causes of the Second World War, about the Gulf of Tonkin incident used to justify our involvement in Vietnam, and lied again about the truth of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and it has and continues to lie about many other things. By deception, the state also hides the consequences of their secret dealings with others. By this, they are able to disconnect outcomes from actions, allowing them to provide any explanation they want, thereby absolving themselves of any wrongdoing and permitting them to respond to attacks as if they were only innocent bystanders minding their own business. By telling lies, deceiving and withholding facts, while at the same time providing ready explanations for its actions, the state can effectively shape the reality its subjects perceive. Censorship and withholding facts from people has reached a new level. Facebook, Google, Twitter, and YouTube, once claimed to be open platforms, are now deplatforming people and removing messages that are at odds with progressive liberal morals and policies of the state or the enlightened titans of Silicon Valley. After drawing in millions and making their platforms indispensable, they lock out those who disagree with them. The size and scope of this is unprecedented and will have profound consequences for freedom and liberty. When coupled with modern psychological methods, initially developed in the United States during the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries, the state's ability to reshape reality becomes truly diabolical. In this form, it is known as propaganda and was employed on a massive scale by the British and Americans in World War I, when they demonized the German people, stirring up hatred. As these countries made the German appear something less than human, it made them easier to hate and ultimately kill. In fact, Germans were lynched in America during World War I. This same methodology was again employed on a massive scale in World War II, both against Japan and Germany. Edward Bernays, the grandson of Sigmund Freud, was instrumental in the development of propaganda, and he is the father of modern marketing. Having literally written the book on propaganda, and marketing, and developed many successful methods, he was highly regarded and employed by corporations and the federal government. It was Bernays' propaganda methods that were used in World War I by the U.S. government to manipulate its citizens, and it was his insight that brought massive profits to corporations as they adopted his methods that allowed them to develop powerful marketing techniques that enabled them to create customer needs where none actually existed. Manipulation of large populations through propaganda and marketing via the printed and visual media, internet, and radio is a science with little guesswork and is now employed by all the principalities and powers, both small and great. Those who do not think for themselves, unfortunately that describes most people, have it done for them by people and institutions whose only desire is to create a reality that enriches themselves. Leo Tolstoy gives an excellent description of the state's power to shape reality. Governments have a terrible power in their hands, and it is not merely a material power. A vast amount of money, institutions, wealth, submissive officials, the clergy and the army, but also vast spiritual powers of influencing men that are in the hands of the government. It can, if not bribe, at least crush and destroy all those who are opposed to it. A bribed clergy preaches militarism in the churches. Bribed authors write books that justify militarism. In the schools, both the higher and the lower, they have introduced the obligatory instruction of deceptive catechisms in which children are impressed with the idea that it is not only allowable, but even obligatory to kill in war and after a trial. All those who enter the army are compelled to take an oath. Everything that could reveal the deception is strictly prohibited and punished, and the most terrible punishments are imposed upon men who do not fulfill the demands of serving in the army, that is, of killing. And strange to say, all that enormous, mighty mass of men, which is vested with all the force of human power, trembles, hides itself, feeling its guilt, is shaken to its foundations, and is ready at any moment to go to pieces and turn to dust at the appearance of one man like Drozhin, who does not yield to human demands, but obeys the demands of God and professes them openly. The state's desire and vision to shape reality is captured by the control exercised by the machines in the movie The Matrix, where machines feed reality to human minds through electronic impulses. The state and its minions will stop at nothing to achieve this end. Unfortunately, well-meaning and not so well-meaning scientists and engineers have already largely given them the means to achieve this end. Central to the state's efforts to define reality is the creation of a sweeping meta-narrative. It must contain some, if not a great deal, of truth. However, this truth must be properly understood. Creating a meta-narrative. All states create a meta-narrative, a grand overarching story of the nation's exploits, self-sacrificing actions, valorous acts in war, divinely ordained creation, and its future greatness and glory. It brings the concepts of salvation, peace, prosperity, meaning, and purpose into one great story. Unfortunately, it is largely a myth, but it sure gets people excited. However, there is also a great deal of truth that accompanies the myth. The key to developing the story is the proper interpretation of events and leaving out those events that are not so easily reinterpreted in the state's favor. In many ways, a good meta-narrative is a panegyric, an entirely uncritical view of the state. No serious self-examination is permitted. No real freedom of thought should pierce the thin gossamer lining of the meta-narrative, lest the people see the truth that their state, their nation, is only a rebellious fallen principality that is quick to shed blood and does not know the way of peace. Central to the teaching of the meta-narrative is education. Thus our schools are, for the most part, government schools. The purpose of public education is not to primarily educate, but to destroy free will and make good citizens. The Germans, the first to adopt compulsory public education, had as their goals the genuine education of their youth and the making of citizens in accord with the state's desires. Free will, however, was to be destroyed, with the free action replaced by training the student to think and act as the state desired them to think and act. America, having adopted a similar system, had similar goals. Today, however, the goal is to create good citizens and destroy free will at the expense of real education. In fact, American schools are more like indoctrination centers than anything else. Obviously, good citizens know and understand the state's meta-narrative, the very same state that defines what is a good citizen. With this sort of control, the state can easily create any story it wants and make good citizens in any fashion it desires. To our detriment, the state does exactly that. The education process can also be employed to overturn a previous meta-narrative and make citizens of a different kind. This is what is happening now in the United States as the cultural Marxists have taken over the universities along with their teacher education programs and history, language, social science, and journalist departments. Although not developed here, it should be mentioned that the state's meta-narrative can be used to birth a state religion, subversive of true religion. This has occurred in many places, including the United States. Control of language. In his dystopian novel, 1984, George Orwell creates a new word, doublespeak, a word that is used to describe the control of language, to say one thing while meaning something else. It also describes the ability to control the vocabulary of a debate, to achieve an advantage in persuasive power. It is the art of linguistic confusion. These methods were developed and employed effectively by many, but the Marxists and socialists have excelled both in innovation and application. Excellent, if disturbing, examples abound in American politics. Abortion is not about the life of the fetus, but choice. Taxes are no longer taxes, but investments. We no longer have a War Department, but a Defense Department. Terrorism is no longer terrorism, but a man-caused event. The list is endless and continues to lengthen. In many ways, it is the logical conclusion of the ancient tactic of claiming that the new policy or law is for the citizens' well-being. This is now affected not only by propaganda, but by the hijacking of language itself. It is not too far from the truth to say that he who controls the language controls reality. Self-deception. The powers are able to carry out their deception upon mankind, not only because they cleverly redefine reality to their advantage, but because of our capacity for self-deception. It is intensely difficult to negatively critique something from which we benefit. What we would condemn in another state, we creatively excuse in our own. We believe our motives are purer, and the negative consequences of our activities are inadvertent or unavoidable in achieving a greater good. We use a double standard, a different ethic. We are hypocrites and we live a lie and an illusion. We are like the man who looks at himself in the mirror and immediately forgets what he saw. Our house is built on sand. Section 12.5. Characterized by death. The state, even as it exists in rebellion against God, finds its proper ethical foundation in God and its God-ordained task to protect the innocent and punish the evil. Although this is true, the state in practice founds its ethics on itself and acts in self-interest. It is autonomous, admitting no authority over it. The state acts as if it were a god. The state is a rebellious principality in power As such, sin characterizes the state. Death was a consequence of the fall of man. Where sin is, death reigns. Therefore, as sin characterizes the state, it is characterized by death. Death is the necessary outcome of sin. Is the state really characterized by death? Does death really permeate the state? How does death manifest itself in the state? The United States was founded by a revolutionary war, a war at odds with God's command in Romans 13 to obey the powers God has set over us. In a very real sense, this country was founded on death brought about by the sinful rebellion of the colonists against the God-ordained authority of the British Crown. U.S. territory was expanded by unnecessary wars with the American Indians, the French, Mexican, Spanish, and Filipinos. As a consequence of these imperial wars, wealth poured into the U.S. At other times, the U.S. threatened war, that is, death and destruction, with gunboat diplomacy to open up foreign markets to increase its wealth. In World War II, U.S. bomber forces again killed millions of innocent people. The U.S. again killed millions of innocent people by death from the sky in the Korean and Vietnam War. In our day, the U.S. has used war to control Middle Eastern energy resources. The wars fought in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Libya killed millions more. To support and enable these wars, a massive banking, economic, and technology complex has been built that spans the entire nation, employing tens of millions of people, all of whom are in the business of dealing death. Most universities receive millions in government and military grants to develop the technology for war. Each year, the U.S. spends nearly $1 trillion on its war machine. Hundreds of billions of dollars are spent to develop demonic weapons meant to kill millions. Nuclear bombs, deadly chemicals, and genetically engineered viruses. And there is never a lack of scientists and engineers to carry out this evil work, all with the approval of our leaders and common man. The average American citizen has no problem with all of this and holds the military in high esteem. Soldiers, the men who actually do the killing, are held in the highest regard. Pride fills the heart when F-16s fly over our major sporting events. The military and its supporting structures constitute a cult of death. Another dimension of the state is also characterized by death. We learn from the scriptures that the state has been given the sword to protect the innocent and punish evil. This is a concession to fallen men in order to establish relative order in a world full of rebels. This means that the state is authorized to kill. Thus, at bottom, the real power of the state, as far as the state sees it, is its ability to kill. Yes, the state's use of the sword is authorized by God, but it is nevertheless killing that gives the state its ultimate power to force obedience and punish. The ability to kill lies at the foundation of the state. It is in this sense that the state is characterized by death. As sinful behavior is encouraged and protected by the state, we see death increase. Abortion is officially protected and funded by the state, sometimes the federal government as well as the separate states. Some governmental entities encourage abortion. Many in our legislatures even approve of infanticide. Since 1972, over 60 million innocent children have been murdered. We may identify more ways that the state is characterized by death, but war, the internal use of the sword to punish evil, and abortion certainly make the point. One can reasonably say that death characterizes the United States. However, the United States is not unique, and a similar analysis of other countries would demonstrate the same. William Stringfellow says, "In the epoch of the fall, every value, every goal, every policy, every action, every routine, every enterprise of each and every principality has the elemental significance of death, notwithstanding contrary appearances." Section 12.6. The state as chief among the principalities. As chief among the powers and principalities within its borders, the state gathers these lesser principalities to increase its power, enrich itself, and secure its existence. Its relationship to these principalities is simultaneously adversarial, symbiotic, as well as a ruler over them. By its monopoly on violence within its borders, it assembles these principalities with tremendous force and the ever-present threat of violence. By rewarding these powers, its accomplices and enablers, with its stolen riches, it perpetuates itself by purchasing their continued support. Among the more important assembled principalities are economic and financial institutions, industry, technology, armies, law, ideology, philosophy, mythology, and education. Of course, the state does not stop with these, but gathers under it institutions and entities of any and all types. The modern state can mobilize with crushing force, if necessary, every institution and person within its borders. It can bend the entire nation to a single task of its choosing. History shows that as it so acts, it works evil on the greatest scale known to man. Nothing can stand against the state. Nothing wars like the state. Nothing kills like the state. Nothing enslaves like the state. Nothing oppresses like the state. Nothing asserts godlike ability like the state. And nothing presumes to appropriate God's prerogatives like the state. The state reigns as chief among the principalities and powers. John's apocalyptic condemnation of empire is fitting, likening it to a whore. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones, and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. The whore of Babylon is empire and is embodied in all great kingdoms outside Jesus' present visible kingdom, and has always included the United States of America, the present great abominable whore, Babylon, by any other name. Section 12.7. An Acolyte's Prophecy. Aldous Huxley. A great deal of evidence has been presented to document the true nature of the state. The state is chief among the principalities and powers, and the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. I have also shown that the current form of the modern nation-state was not developed by accident, but deliberately designed by several disparate groups. As H.G. Wells writes, there has been and remains an open conspiracy. Several large volumes could be written on this open conspiracy, and viewing more of this material would be helpful in supporting the argument presented in this chapter. But this task is too large and not for this book. However, before leaving the subject, it will be instructive, even if disturbing, to listen to the words of one of those conspiratorial intimates who knew in detail what was to come and the methods used to achieve the ends of those who would make the state God and enslave mankind. Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World. What follows are portions of the foreword of the 1946 edition of Brave New World. Huxley writes, "This really revolutionary revolution is to be achieved not in the external world, but in the souls and flesh of human beings. The aim of the new technocrats is not anarchy but social stability, stability as they define it, and achieved by whatever means they decide. Huxley writes further, "It is in order to achieve stability that they carry out by scientific means the ultimate personal, really revolutionary revolution." Huxley makes it clear that this revolution will fundamentally remake mankind. And, quoting Huxley, "We are in the first phase of what is perhaps the penultimate revolution. The result, pretty obviously, will be a series of economic and social changes unprecedented in rapidity and completeness. All the existing patterns of human life will be disrupted, and new patterns will have to be improvised to conform with the non-human fact of atomic power. Procrustes in modern dress, the nuclear scientist, will prepare the bed on which mankind must lie. And if mankind doesn't fit, well, that will be just too bad for mankind. There will have to be stretching and a bit of amputation, the same sort of stretchings and amputations as have been going on ever since applied science really got into its stride, only this time they will be a good deal more drastic than in the past. These far from painless operations will be directed by highly centralized totalitarian governments. Inevitably so, for the immediate future is likely to resemble the immediate past, and in the immediate past rapid technological changes taking place in a mass-producing economy and among a population predominantly propertyless have always tended to produce economic and social confusion. To deal with confusion, power has been centralized and government control increased. It is probable that all the world's governments will be more or less completely totalitarian, even before the harnessing of atomic energy. That they will be totalitarian during and after the harnessing seems almost certain. Only a large-scale popular movement toward decentralization and self-help can arrest the present tendency toward statism. At present, there is no sign that such a movement will take place. The expected changes will come quickly and brutally, with no concern for those who do not desire them. It's just too bad for them, and science will be the anvil and the hammer to pound man into the desired shape. Of course, all this is necessary because of the confusion and dislocation caused by the unrestrained advance of technology, and as we have seen, its abuse. It appears that we are in the latter stages of this cultural dislocation, brought on by the general advance of technology and digital technology in particular. However, it was not the nuclear engineer who would become the high priest of the transforming technology, but the electrical and software engineer. The means of dealing with this dislocation has indeed been the massive centralization of power, resulting in tyranny all over the globe. That this tyranny is of the softer kind that mankind willingly embraces does not lessen the horrid truth that we live in tyrannies. Predictably, the dislocation coupled with socialism has made nearly all dependent on the state for even basic needs, creating a slave mentality and cutting off a popular movement toward decentralization and self-help that can arrest the present tendency toward statism. Huxley continues, "There is, of course, no reason why the new totalitarians should resemble the old. A really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude. To make them love it is the task assigned in present-day totalitarian states to ministries of propaganda, newspaper editors, and school teachers. But their methods are still crude and unscientific. The greatest triumphs of propaganda have been accomplished not by doing something, but by refraining from doing. Great is truth, but greater from a practical point of view is silence about truth. By simply not mentioning certain subjects, by lowering what Mr. Churchill calls the iron curtain between the masses and such facts or arguments as the local political bosses regard as undesirable, totalitarian propagandists have influenced opinion much more effectively than they could have done by the most eloquent denunciations, the most compelling of logical rebuttals. But silence is not enough. If persecution, liquidation, and other symptoms are to be avoided, the positive sides of propaganda must be made as effective as the negative. The cultural manipulators have honed their skills far beyond what Huxley imagines here. The media, with its brainwashing methods, initially developed by Edward Bernays, along with music and digital videos, have created unimaginable worlds that captivate millions and cause them to believe in an illusion. The mainstream media is so captivated by the goals of their political and cultural bosses that they faithfully obfuscate and hide the truth. Our schools are perhaps the most effective at hiding truth and brainwashing our youth and young adults whose minds they destroy from kindergarten to graduate school. Huxley continues, the most important Manhattan projects of the future will be vast government-sponsored inquiries into what the politicians and the participating scientists will call the problem of happiness. In other words, the problem of making people love their servitude. Without economic security, the love of servitude cannot possibly come into existence. For the sake of brevity, I assume that the all-powerful executive and its managers will succeed in solving the problem of permanent security. But security tends to very quickly be taken for granted. Its achievement is merely a superficial external revolution. The love of servitude cannot be established except as the result of a deep personal revolution in human minds and bodies. To bring about that revolution, we require, among other things, the following discoveries and inventions. And here we find the real goal of our technocratic masters. Make the masses love their chains. From history, we know that this can be done. Recall Etienne de la Boétie's The Politics of Obedience, the discourse on voluntary servitude. We even have the horrific enslavement of the American black community, a community that would rise up in violence if the government were to attempt to free them by ending their welfare and special preferences. Huxley even enumerates the methods that will be used to cause man to love servitude. He writes, first, a greatly improved technique of suggestion through infant conditioning and later with the aid of drugs such as scopolamine. Actually, the method of suggestion has been perfected not in drugs but in propaganda, flowing from the media saturation brought to us by radios, TV, iPods, iPads, computers, internet, and magazines. It is virtually impossible to remove yourself from this torrent of filth and isolate yourself from the never-ending onslaught of marketing propaganda. Huxley continues, second, a fully developed science of human differences, enabling government managers to assign any given individual to his or her proper place in the social and economic hierarchy. Round pegs in square holes tend to have dangerous thoughts about the social system and to infect others with their discontents. This second tool would certainly be useful, but it is not yet proven to be necessary. I am certain, however, that in time this too will be used. Continuing Huxley, he says, third, since reality, however utopian, is something from which people feel the need of taking pretty frequent holidays, a substitute for alcohol and other narcotics, something at once less harmful and more pleasure-giving than gin or heroin. Modern pharmacology has given us soma, antidepressants. Are you uptight? Is life a bit too hard? Are you feeling down? No problem, we have a pill for that. Today, the rough edges of life are rounded off and softened. The very rough edges that move us to greater discipline, greater achievements, elevated moral development, and cause us to deal with our problems head on rather than ignore them. Grief, sorrow, guilt, anxiety, dissatisfaction with our lives are not always negative, but are the natural and healthy response to lives and conditions that we must change or learn to accept. These emotions are to our mental life what physical pain is to our bodies. Those who cannot feel physical pain destroy their bodies, and those who cannot feel their emotional pain cannot heal their minds and souls or change their world when it ought to be changed, or accept it when it cannot be changed. However, embracing the modern pharmacological solution, we find that the chains being forged in front of us and now being affixed are not such a bad deal. Just give me another pill. Continuing, Huxley says, and fourth, but this would be a long-term project, which would take generations of totalitarian control to bring to a successful conclusion, a foolproof system of eugenics designed to standardize the human product so as to facilitate the task of the managers. Little did Huxley realize how quickly man would develop the tools necessary to standardize the human product. The advent of genetic engineering has given the technocrats the perfect tool. They know how to do it, but society has not decayed sufficiently to allow these godlike leaders to make man as they see fit. However, it is certain that they will be used, and in time it will be used ubiquitously. At that time, we will deliberately design stupid but strong humans for menial tasks, obedient yet strong and vicious killers for our soldiers, smart but physically weak men for business and management, and a few alphas who are brilliant and strong, who will occupy the halls of power and decide what man is to become. And they will bring hell to earth, and people will love it. It will not be unlike what we have today. Huxley continues saying, meanwhile, the other characteristic features of this happier and more stable world, the equivalents of soma and hypnopedia and the scientific caste system, are all probably not more than 3 or 4 generations away. Nor does the sexual promiscuity of Brave New World seem so distant. There are already certain American cities in which the number of divorces equals the number of marriages. In a few years, no doubt, marriage licenses will be sold like dog licenses, good for a period of 12 months, with no law against changing dogs or keeping more than one animal at a time. As political and economic freedom diminishes, sexual freedom tends compensatingly to increase, and the dictator, unless he needs cannon fodder and families with which to colonize empty, conquered territories, will do well to encourage that freedom. In conjunction with the freedom to daydream under the influence of dope and movies and the radio, it will help to reconcile his subjects to the servitude which is their fate. Here we find perhaps the most effective means of enslavement, the destruction of a people's moral life. This project has been completed and has been successful beyond any reasonable expectation. The keys have been education, the media, and recently the Internet that has made pornography available to any and all. Returning to Huxley, all things considered, it looks as though utopia were far closer to us than anyone only 15 years ago could have imagined. Indeed, unless we choose to decentralize and use applied science, not as the end to which human beings are to be made the means, but as the means to producing a race of free individuals, we have only 2 alternatives to choose from. Either a number of national militarized totalitarianisms, having as their root the terror of the atomic bomb, and as the consequence the destruction of civilization, or, if the warfare is limited, the perpetuation of militarism, or else one supranational totalitarianism called into existence by the social chaos resulting from rapid technological progress in general and the atomic revolution in particular, and developing under the need for efficiency into the welfare tyranny of utopia. You pays your money, and you take your chances. It appears that man has chosen the road to a supranational totalitarianism. The chaos, however, for the time being, is caused by the purposeful destruction of cultural and economic life. It also appears that man's masters are once again moving the world to war, a war after which they will more easily shape the world into the form they desire. As you can see, all this was planned long ago, and almost nothing happens by accident, but is driven by either evil or good. At the moment, the whole world lies in the power of the evil one, and his world is moving rapidly to its destructive terminus, that is, the judgment of God. God's people, however, continue to build his kingdom, faithfully waiting for their king to return and finally set things aright. Section 12.8. Conclusion. In response to the state's horror show, some will retreat into the mistaken and unsupportable belief that we have only looked at aberrant states and behavior. The truth is that we have only looked at a small slice of history and a small sampling of the evil and corruption in which all states engage. Much has been left unsaid and unexamined, but we can be sure, however, that all states, to one degree or another, are now characterized and have been characterized by what has been stated above. Those refusing the path of self-deception have unplugged from the state's matrix, having taken off their state-provided rose-colored glasses, and can now see the state for what it is, not what they would wish it to be or what God would have it to be, but what it is in truth, a malignant, fallen, evil power, even if it may perform its God-given tasks from time to time. For them, the state's great meta-narrative no longer has the power it once held over them, for they see it for the sham that it is. They will be appropriately thankful and even grateful as the state protects the innocent and punishes the evil, but they will no more conflate it with God's people. They will also see that the state is neither benign nor neutral regarding the things of God. Neither is it virtuous, even if some good and virtuous men sometimes enter its service. The state, as the state, remains a rebellious principality and power. However, the state is not just any principality, for it can summon every other power to accomplish its ends. It truly presumes to make itself God, ruling over the other powers, manipulating reality for its own ends, amassing omnipotence and omniscience. As chief among the principalities, the state sets the standard for the rebellious principalities. It is absolute in its claims, utterly self-interested, radically and aggressively redefines reality by creating sweeping mythological meta-narratives, is exploitive and oppressive to an unimaginable degree, and yet presents itself as the true savior of mankind. The state, operating beyond its God-given mandate, is truly chief among the principalities. Nothing compares. After seeing the powers for what they are, it is impossible to align ourselves with them, or to look upon them as benefactors or with pride, and it is obscene to see others give themselves wholly over to them, supporting them and assisting them in achieving their ends. You can never look at the world the same way. From what we have seen above, please explain how one who claims to follow Christ comes to believe that they can participate in such a thing. Shall we say that it truly benefits me even if it does not benefit all others? How can we say it works for us if others are exploited for our benefit? Jesus taught us that our love for those who love us counts for little, for even evil men do the same. How then can the love shown us by the state, by the benefits it provides to us, especially as we benefit from its exploitation of others, be of value to us? How can this be when only the love of enemies is counted as truly virtuous by God? Knowing God's plan for mankind and the horrid creature, truly a tragic evil parody, the nations become in enforcing their redemptive plan on mankind. We as true Christians cannot love or make common cause with the nation of our birth or any other nation. Only King Jesus' kingdom instantiated in his church is fit and worthy of our allegiance, and only Jesus' means and ends are fit for men and women who would truly be human. But how can we be so blind to the truth that stands before us, of which only a small portion has been reviewed in this chapter? Why aren't we moved to shame and tears for having believed the state's lies? God, please open our eyes so we may see, and open our ears so we may hear. To participate in the state, the chief human pretender to God's throne, employing its means and seeking its ends, is to engage in idolatry. Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor homosexuals, nor thieves, nor the covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. The only thing that can stand against the state, the only refuge from the chief principality and power, is the present incarnation of Christ, his bride, the spotless and blameless church purchased with his blood. Only it, by the power of the Holy Spirit, is equipped for the tearing down of strongholds and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of Christ.